Hi.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here with you.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah,
Young,
thank you.
aspiring journalists.
Yes.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we both read your book, and we kind of just wanted to start asking you questions more like on the background of journalism and how you got into it. So what was like your original reason for choosing journalism as a career path?
I didn't plan to be a journalist. Like, I didn't take journalism courses. I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And I was an English major in college, and so I cast as wide a net as I possibly could and applied for lots of different things, including an NPR internship. And I got rejected for an NPR internship, which I think is actually really important for people to remember that, like, folks who seem successful, folks who are successful, have literally every one of them experienced a lot of failure along the way. And so failure is a part of the process. It's like a step on the path to success. It's not the end of the process. It's not the opposite of success. And so after I got rejected for an NPR internship, I found out that Nina Totenberg, who is like legendary legal affairs correspondent who's been at NPR for decades. Actually, now I realize I've been at NPR for decades too. But anyway, she gave me an opportunity to be her intern. And then I basically just never left. And what I realized I love so much about journalism is it's the opportunity to tell stories, to pursue my creativity, to learn new things every day, and then to share that with people, which I love doing.
That's great. I think that's a really good thing for people to keep in mind when they're pursuing their career. Do you believe that journalism has any particular role in society?
Oh, absolutely. I think democracy is based on the idea that we are all deciding what's best for our community, for our country, for our city, for our state. And we can't know what's best if we don't know what's going on. And so the role of a journalist is to inform people about their community, about their country, about the world, so that people can be not just more informed participants in a democracy, but also more aware of the people around them and the lives that folks live who are outside of their immediate bubbles of understanding.
You know, coming out of a pandemic and in what is really such a tumultuous time in the world right now, do you believe that journalism can shape the world in a positive way? Do you think it has a particular... Do you think journalists are responsible for the betterment of society?
Well, I think what journalism can do really powerfully is help us see the world through the eyes of someone else. So you might know that supplemental food nutrition benefits are being cut, that families who used to get, I'm making up a number here, $100 a month are now going to get $70 a month. But journalism can actually show you what that looks like and help you understand what that feels like for people who are having to make difficult decisions. You might know that Russia invaded Ukraine, but I think journalism, beyond just that fact, can tell you about the experience of people living in Ukraine, what they're going through, and what that means for people who, even if they are far away from us and speak a different language, in a country that we might never visit, people who are really no different from us. And so I think journalism can create connections, can help us bridge differences and make the foreign seem a little bit less strange.
And kind of going off of that, obviously a huge part of journalism is communication and how you communicate with others. How do you have any strategies for when you remove your own personal biases when interacting with people from different backgrounds?
So for me, the important distinction is that I'm not trying to influence, I'm trying to illuminate. And when I'm talking to somebody who has a very different set of experiences, values, worldview from me, I'm not trying to find the flaws in their argument per se. I'm not trying to convince them that they should change their mind. I'm really trying to understand where they are coming from. And I think it is important that we look at the role our own history, identity, experience plays, and whether that creates blinders that might be getting in the way of our telling an authentic story. But ultimately, I think when I go out as a journalist, my goal is to reach an understanding, to better know the people and the places that I'm in as a journalist, and then share that with an audience. And so the opinions that I may have are, in some sense, just not a factor in the kind of work that I'm doing, in the same way that a defense attorney who represents a client may not think that their client is a good person, but they believe so strongly in the importance of people having legal defense that the role they are serving is one in which their opinion about the person really doesn't matter. And similarly, I set out to illuminate the world for people in a way that almost makes my feelings about it irrelevant. Now, the flip side of that is that, and one of the things that I wanted to write about in this book, is the way that my identity and my history and my experience does, in some ways, inform my storytelling, and the way that we do have to be aware of bias. And so I write about that when I was covering the Pulse nightclub shooting in 2016, and the role that my own experience going to gay bars, specifically in Orlando, specifically Pulse, the way that affected the stories that I was telling about that massacre.
Going a little more personal, do you think journalism has really shaped the way you communicate with other people, like when you're out in the field or when you're conducting an interview? How has your experiences in these different positions you tell in your book really shaped your communication?
I think that you can get good at anything by doing it often enough. And so I've spent more than 20 years now just talking to people and asking them questions about their life and trying to elicit good stories from them. Like, that's always my goal, is to elicit a good story from them. And over many years of doing that, I've had a lot of bad interviews. I've had a lot of bad conversations. I've found out what doesn't work a lot. And that helps me get experience with what does work and learn what is more likely to evoke a good story, a good answer, an interesting anecdote. And I like to think that, like, when I'm chatting with people at a dinner party or in a casual setting, I hope, even if I'm not interviewing them as a journalist, that I'm able to sort of cut through the small talk and get around the chit-chat and have a real conversation, because hopefully that's a skill that I've built over my time as a journalist.
Now, you mentioned the Pulse nightclub, and in your book you really have this debate of like being this, being gay as part of your identity, while also being in this really conformist and heteronormative society and position as a reporter in DC. Mm-hmm. Do you feel as though your career as a journalist has forced you in some ways to be more heteroconforming than you might have been otherwise?
It's a great question, and I don't think so. What I realized is that when I started my career in journalism, I wasn't sure that it was a place for people like me. And then I remembered that NPR was the first news organization to have a woman host a nationally broadcast nightly news program, Susan Stamberg hosting All Things Considered. And so from the very beginning, the news media has been evolving, and NPR has been helping to make the news media evolve. And so the kind of realization that I had was that if there wasn't a place for me in journalism, I could make a place. And I could help journalism continue evolving and carry that torch forward, just as Susan Stamberg had, just as others have. And so hopefully what I've done over my time at NPR is help make this world a little more welcoming, a little more open, a little more expansive. And what's so exciting for me now is that there are people who work on All Things Considered with me who are 20 years younger than I am, and I see them continuing the work of making journalism a more inclusive, more welcoming place that has space for everyone. And the job is never done, but that's what makes it exciting, is that like there's always ways that you can help carry the project forward. And I think the important lesson to take away is that if it doesn't feel like there's room for you in a certain space, you don't necessarily just have to walk away from it. It might be your opportunity to create room.
In what ways does journalism fulfill your need for self-expression?
My parents taught me when I was a kid that the more you learn about the world, the more interesting life is. And so when I was a kid in Oregon, like that was a lesson that we applied to nature. It was like bird watching, wild mushroom hunting, identifying wildflowers, tide pooling. But I'm just a really curious person. I want to know about the world. I want to know about what makes people tick. I want to get into people's lives and see how they live. And as a journalist, I'm able to do that. I can go to places and be nosy. I use the analogy of my microphone and headset almost feel like a snorkel and mask that let me explore hidden worlds I wouldn't have access to otherwise. And then I get to share those worlds with you and with millions of other people, which is such a privilege and such an incredible opportunity that I feel like the best thing about journalism for me is that it lets me pursue my curiosity and it lets me learn about something new every day.
In your book, you also talk about your travels with Pink Martini a lot.
Yeah.
Do you view your role in Pink Martini and your career as a journalist similar in any ways? Are both something you consider somewhat a performance?
Yeah, so for people who don't know, Pink Martini is this band. They're like a little orchestra, more than a dozen people. They're from my hometown of Portland, Oregon. And for the last, 13 years, I've been using my vacation time to tour with them, and I've done 1 or 2 songs on each of their last few albums. When I started writing the book, I thought that Pink Martini was like a completely different thing from the journalism. But what I realized as I was writing was they actually do have a lot more in common than I thought, which is they're both about creating connections and empathy, making the foreign seem a bit more familiar and a bit less strange. And one does it through music and live performance and everybody having an experience in the room at the same time. The other is through journalism and a sort of much more intimate experience of listening to a story in your ears on your own or in the car or whatever the case may be. But ultimately, these are both ways of trying to create connections.
And then I guess similarly, how have your experiences with cabaret and like on-stage performances impacted your creative and journalistic endeavors?
Yeah, so I created this cabaret with the actor Alan Cumming, and he and I do this show together. That's just the two of us kind of singing songs and telling stories. And there's something just electric about doing something that will only ever exist exactly that way just one time, And the people who are in the room for a performance will never be in that room again, the exact same, permutation in the exact same way. And there's like a real electric give and take that is different from, when I'm on the radio, I might be speaking to thousands or millions of people, but I don't know. Like, I'm just talking to the one person who happens to be listening, no matter how many one persons there may be. And so doing live performance like cabaret is a little more expansive and a little more give and take with the audience in real time. And cabaret is also a little more personal, whereas in journalism, it's never supposed to be about me. As a cabaret artist, you were telling vulnerable stories, which I think for me was kind of a stepping stone to being able to write this book, which was much more reflecting on myself than I had ever done before.
And do you, how have your personal experiences and your upbringing really influenced your journalistic abilities and the direction which you take your career in? Yeah,
I was born in Fargo, North Dakota, and lived there till I was 8. And I was one of 2 Jewish kids in my school, the other one being my older brother. And so every December, we would take a menorah and a dreidel from classroom to classroom and talk to these kids about what Hanukkah is and what Judaism is. And it was my first experience being an ambassador and explaining something that might have seemed different to people to make it seem a little less foreign. And then similarly, when I came out of the closet at the age of 16, when my family lived in Portland, Oregon, I was once again sort of performing this act of connection and translation with students at my high school who had never knowingly met a gay person. And so those are the kinds of skills that I now use as a journalist, but I'm able to use them with groups that I don't have any personal experience or connection to beyond my curiosity about them.
And then how has like your identity as minority, falling into multiple minority categories, how does journalism welcome minorities? Is it a welcoming career path? Has that openness and welcoming sort of environment grown over the years?
It has definitely grown over the years. I think being a member of a marginalized group sort of allows you to see the scaffolding that society is built on a bit more clearly than those who might not perceive the water they swim in. But I also think it's important to recognize that identity is not just membership in a marginalized group. The fact that I'm white affects my worldview as much as the fact that I'm gay or more. The fact that I'm male, the fact that I'm American, the fact that I'm an English speaker, these are all aspects of my identity that shape the stories I tell, and I think awareness of that helps me be a better storyteller.
And have there been times where you felt it necessary to choose between a piece of your identity and your career?
Fortunately, I haven't had to choose. There have definitely been moments, like I write in the book about getting married to my husband in 2004 when same-sex marriage was not legal in most of the country, and I felt like, well, this is like a big battle in the culture wars. I'm not sure if I should be stepping into the middle of it. But there's never been a moment where I felt like I'm going to have to give up my career in order to be true to the person I am. And that's a testament to the people I've worked with over the years who have always sort of allowed me to be my full self and also continue as a journalist.
Okay, I guess just pivoting really quickly, I know we have to wrap up, to kind of the topic of gay rights in general. Are there any areas, or what work do you think is still need to be done, either on part of journalism or just in general, for like the progression of LGBTQ plus rights?
I think what we're seeing right now is a wave of legislation in many states targeting queer people and particularly trans people. And to me, the most useful thing that we can do is learn from our history. Because queer people have faced adversity through our entire existence and have figured out ways to not only exist but to thrive in the face of that. And I think that generally speaking, queer people are not raised by other LGBTQ people. So we have to seek out our elders. You know, we have to seek out people who lived through the AIDS crisis, who lived through Stonewall, who know what these skills were that our community gained and learned and practiced over the decades so that we don't feel like we're starting from scratch in whatever time and place we have to be living in.
And, you know, really to wrap it up, you mentioned that when you went to the camp in Tennessee and you met with one of these elders you're talking about of the gay rights movement. What was the most prominent lesson you took from that camp?
Well, Hector Black, the man you're referring to, said it best. The most important thing is just to love.
Thank you for coming.
I've really enjoyed the conversation. Those were great questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're happy to have you.